Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. Before we get into this episode, I'm going to read this ad. The biggest betting weekend of the year is finally here, which means more updated odds and props for Super Sunday. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. We have hundreds of prop bets, MVP odds, and exclusive in-game live betting. BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline offers you everything and more to enhance your game day experience. Visit the website today and make the game day action count a little bit more. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so maybe not major news, but we do have news coming out of the Baltimore Orioles. They have announced that they have signed outfielder Ramon Laureano to a one-year deal. It's a $4 million guarantee for this upcoming season in 2025, and then there's a $6.5 million club option for 2026. So that is more or less favorable to the Orioles. I'm sorry, infielder Luis Vasquez was DFA'd to make room for Laureano on the 40-man roster. So Laureano is an addition to an already rather crowded outfield for the Baltimore Orioles. Coming into spring training, there is going to be some question marks as to how the outfield will shake out. And Laureano sort of adds to the uncertainty a little bit. Now, in my estimation, Laureano has a very, very good chance of making the major league team out of spring training. Most of the time, you do not pay somebody $4 million and then end up cutting them. So, um, Laureano has added himself to the Orioles major league roster. He will be around for the 2025 Baltimore Orioles. Now, of course, there is a possibility that he ends up getting traded at the deadline. He will not, in all likelihood, get traded before opening day because if a team wanted him, they could have given him this deal. I'm sure he let other teams know the framework for the agreement, seeing if anybody could better the offer, and nobody did. So, given that he is now under contract with the Baltimore Orioles, uh, I highly doubt that he is going to be traded before opening day. Now, that does not mean that the Orioles will not end up trading anybody or any outfielders before opening day. I think that a move like this actually increases the odds that somebody does get moved. But in terms of Laureano, Laureano will, in all likelihood, be on the major league team for the 2025 Baltimore Orioles. Now, like I sort of referenced at the beginning, this is not a massive, massive move. This is not the Orioles acquiring Luis Castillo, for instance. This isn't the Orioles signing Pete Alonso, for instance. But Ramon Laureano is a very solid player. He is a good guy to have on a major league roster. He has skills that are useful and helpful to a major league winning team. In all, he seems like a very competitive, very dedicated person. Now he does and was returning from a PED suspension, and granted, a lot of people have uh, very negative feelings about that. And if you're one of them, at least in certain situations, I can sort of respect your opinion on that. And so, you know, the Orioles are bringing a guy in who is not fully, I guess, squeaky clean, in the way that, there are other examples of players out there that are now, uh, and just because he tested positive for PEDs. That does not mean that he is necessarily uh, a worse person or anything like that. He clearly made a mistake, but that doesn't necessarily mean that guys on our team who have not tested positive for steroids already are not, problematic in their own ways. So, I guess with all that said, some people, some Oriole fans might have some negative emotions or mixed feelings about bringing a guy who was suspended for using PEDs into the organization. I'm not entirely concerned about that. He served his suspension. He got the punishment that I guess fit, I don't want to say the crime, but fit the mistake that he made in terms of in terms of baseball. And now that he's served his suspension, which I think was a reasonable suspension for his error, um, I think that he should sort of more or less have a clean slate, and he shouldn't be there should not be, I don't think, an informal I guess agreement among Major League Baseball teams that we're not going to sign Laureano because of his history and et cetera, right? Let alone all the double standards that come along with these sorts of situations, depending upon the caliber of the player, right? If Juan Soto, for instance, which he is not, tested positive for PEDs, there is no way that all the teams in Major League Baseball are not going to. Create an informal agreement not to sign Soto. No, obviously somebody would. Laureano is not that quality of player. But with all that said, regardless, the major league teams have not created um, that sort of agreement to not sign him, which I think is a good thing. And he's going to be coming to the Orioles, and I think, has a very decent chance of making this club a slightly better baseball team. Now, I don't think he's going to be a guy that adds or gives the Orioles 4 wins over the course of the season, and I'm not just even saying like a 4 WAR player. I'm just saying like I don't think he's going to be that consequential to have that sort of significance, but that doesn't mean that he can't be a valuable and important part of this major league team. Now, I think it is also worth saying, I did mention earlier that he is coming into a crowded outfield. And I think this is pretty standard for the Orioles to be casting more or less a wide net prior to the season. We know what sorts of things can happen in terms of players getting injured, in terms of all these sorts of things that can compromise the integrity of a major league roster. So similar to what the Orioles have done with the pitching, where we have a really, really deep rotation at this point. Might not be a particularly great rotation, but it is deep. The Orioles are sort of doing something similar, it seems, by casting a wide net for the outfield, and then sort of as time progresses, as we get into spring training, trying to figure out how everybody is going to fit onto and within the organization. And I am broadening it out to say the organization rather than the active roster, for instance, because some of the guys that are um, trying to solidify a major league roster spot could end up in AAA, for instance. And there are a few examples of who that might be. Yeah, the Orioles are trying to, I think, bring in um, you know, a variety of players and then just trying to figure it out. The Orioles, of course, will delay decisions as long as possible. Somebody might get injured, which would make a lot of the decisions a lot easier for this team. And then, of course, there's always a possibility of players not performing well or somebody like Laureano or anybody else within the organization really standing out and solidifying their spot on the major league roster, even in the spring training, right? And this could, who that player might be could range from Kerstad to Dylan Carlson, etc. So yeah, the Orioles, I think, are just trying to accumulate a lot of talent and then try to figure out where everybody is going to fit in. And maybe a more accurate word for talent is depth. And I think that might be a more accurate way to say it. Not to say that these guys are not talented, but I think it is clear that the Orioles are not prioritizing getting the most talented players within the organization right now at this point in time. Um, so, what are the consequences of this? So Laureano, he is a guy, he is a right-handed hitter. He's coming into an outfield that has a lot of left-handed bats in it. Cedric Mullins, Kerstad, and Colton Cowser as well are all left-handed hitting outfielders. Mullins, of course, used to be switch hitter. Now he just hits from the left side. And so Ramon Laureano is going to enter this outfield and sort of provide a counterbalance to the existing outfield. Now, the Orioles do have some righties as well, most notable, of course, being Tyler O'Neill, who the Orioles signed this offseason. But with all that said, uh, Laureano is going to sort of be there to supplement the right-handed bats for the outfield. And he does, in addition to being a right-handed hitter, he does have splits. He does hit lefties better than he hits righties. So that is going to be favorable for the Orioles. They are probably going to include both Tyler O'Neill and Laureano into the outfield when a lefty pitcher is on the mound. So that will end up happening, at least most of the time for the Orioles this upcoming year. Now, one thing to think about with Laureano and his splits is even though he will probably get a good amount of time in playing hitting against left-handed pitchers in 2023 and 2024, he had 11 home runs total in 2024 between two different teams. And in 2023, he had 9 home runs with 13 and 14 the years before that. Back in 2019, when he was 24, it looked like he would have a lot more pop when he hit 24 home runs at the age 24 season. But he has never in the majors been able to replicate that. Now, there are a lot of factors and variables that contribute to that. The suspension, there have been injuries in his career. There have been limited plate appearances. But overall, we are not getting somebody to hit against lefties who is going to mash sort of in the same way that Tyler O'Neill will. Now, he'll be a very productive hitter, or he will be a productive hitter against left-handed pitchers, but in terms of the actual power, there's probably not going to be a ton from that perspective. Now he does offer some speed on the base paths. Um, I mean, he doesn't have a ton of stolen bases, but in 2024 he had 8, and in 2023 he had 12, and those are the totals between all the teams he played for in those years. Um, so he sort of gets around 10 bags a year, which is not nothing. It's not Adley's one bag, which is more or less negligible. But it's also not, he's not tremendous on the base paths either. He's not Cedric Mullins or Mateo or somebody of this caliber when we're talking about his speed and his ability to swipe bags. Yeah, just sort of thinking about his offensive profile, he's going to be probably somebody who is on the bench most of the time when he is hitting against lefties. I'm sorry, he's going to be on the bench most of the time when there are right-handed pitchers on the mound, and he will be most of the time, I think, in the lineup against the lefties. Um, if we're thinking about like his OPS in 2024, he had a total of a 748 OPS. With Atlanta, the second half of the year, he did have a really impressive 832 OPS. But that was very much, well, first of all, it was in limited plate appearances, only 226 plate appearances. And prior to that, in the several years prior to that, he hadn't been able to get anywhere close to that, which sort of makes you wonder a little bit, to what extent is that 832 OPS real? He had a 748 OPS total in 2024, I'm sorry, a 676 total OPS in 2023, 663, and then 760 all the way back in 2021. So there's a lot of reason to sort of have some sort of skepticism about what his OPS will look like when he comes to play for the Orioles, even if he is just predominantly hitting against left-handed pitchers. It's not going to be stellar. It's not going to be outstanding in all likelihood, but it will be serviceable, and that is useful, especially for this team that is lacking right-handed bats for the outfield at this point in time. So, yeah, when thinking about like the offense, I think that like we should not have massive expectations or hopes for what he will do, but we anticipate that he can at least be solid when he's playing. So that would be good. Now, if we're looking at the defensive side, he's really actually kind of interesting to look at. So his outs above average were -6, which is really bad. It's in the eighth percentile for Major League Baseball. Uh, so he has really bad range. But with that said, he has a tremendous arm. Now, if you look at like in his past, you see some of his highlight reels. He's made some incredible assists from the outfield, for instance, where he is just throwing guys out from really deep distances. Um, and he has a great arm. He has an absolutely great arm. Yeah, his arm value overall is as good as it can be. It's in the 100th percentile. It is like the best. And then his arm strength is in the 89th percentile. So, uh, he has a really strong arm. And then on top of that, it's also highly accurate and it's very good. So, it's a little bit, you never really anticipate, I guess, prior to a game, what you're going to need. He is potentially a guy, if he can get to the ball, is a guy that will, prevent doubles or hold guys to first. But in terms of making the highlight reels with diving catches, the Cedric Mullins type plays, um, we are probably not going to anticipate that out of him. His range is limited. Most likely, he will be more or less relegated to a corner outfield position. Maybe he gets a little time in center, but the Orioles are really, really deep in center field. With Cowser can play, Mullins, of course, and then we also have Jorge Mateo, who can be put out there as needed. Yeah, so thinking about just like his defense, he has a lot of strengths, but also a really big negative, which is the range. And potentially the range is the more important element of your outfield abilities. The thing that's worth noting is that most of the time, unlike certain skills that are more sort of acceptable being paired or more okay being paired. If there is a guy who doesn't hit home runs, but really hits for a lot of contact or a high average or gets on base a lot, that kind of thing is more okay. But when you're fielding, you have to be out there for the duration of the time. And you don't know what exactly is going to happen for the most part, right? It's not like most of the time there are going to be a lot of situations where, okay, the winning run is on third base and the Orioles have the ability to make a defensive replacement, go put Laureano out in the outfield so that he can make a throw home in case the runner at third tries to score. Like that is not going to be a very frequent situation. So you got to sort of take the positive with the negative with his defense, and you can't really, it's not really a skill that you can blend and mix and match for the situation in the case of a situation like with his offensive profile where he's better against lefties than he is against righties, right? So that kind of pairing in that way um is it's very interesting. It's fascinating in the sense of like I don't know how many outfielders there are that good with their arm and then also that bad with their range. So it's kind of like it puts them in a category that is probably very different than a lot of regular outfielders. But with that said, how useful is that for the Orioles organization and for Brandon Hyde, for instance? That is where it gets a little bit trickier. And I don't think it's really as useful. You got to sort of um, accept his overall defensive value more or less when you put him out there. So yeah, it's sort of I think that this leads a lot of questions about what the Orioles are going to do headed into spring training and headed into opening day. I There is, I think now, an increased possibility that Kerstag gets traded. I think that's the big takeaway from this. Um, Potentially it does increase the chance that Colton Cowser, for instance, were to get traded. If Cowser were to get traded in that situation, the Orioles would be getting back something much, much better. That Cowser is a guy that could sort of be moved in a trade for, say, a Luis Castillo, right? At least part of a deal for Luis Castillo or something to that effect. We're getting so close to pitchers and catchers reporting. I don't anticipate the Orioles really making a giant splash with a trade at this point, and I think the Orioles are going to head into spring training and opening day just with their current game plan that I sort of laid out, that they're trying to expand depth to the biggest extent possible. And then they're going to figure it out as we get closer and as they have to make the critical decisions that they want to delay as long as possible. So, um, Yeah, although, with all that said, I think this move does increase the likelihood that someone like Kerstad and potentially, uh, even though I think to a much lesser extent, somebody like Colton Cowser gets traded. So those are possibilities. I just don't think that's predominantly and most likely what's actually going on in this situation. I think the Orioles are just trying to expand and accumulate depth as much as they can. So it does leave some question marks, some additional question marks for the outfield. It does expand the already crowded outfield for the Orioles. In terms of the move, I think it's a solid move, I guess. This is sort of the move you've come to expect from Mike Elias, right? This is the kind of thing that he is willing to do. And I guess why would you not be willing to do it? Because uh, there is very low risk involved. It's $4 million for this year, plus all the benefits of a club option. If he does really, really well and sort of has a resurgence, then the Orioles can sort of act in a more or less, I mean, it's arguable if it's predatory, but potentially the Orioles can sort of act in a way where they get all the benefit of sort of him refinding the player and his previous potential that he's never fully exploited or discovered to the fullest extent. The Orioles get all the potential of that for a relatively minor cost, especially in the context of the wealth of David Rubenstein, for instance. So overall, I think it's a good move. It's definitely not the exciting, now the Orioles are headed to the World Series type of move that I think a lot of Oriole fans are on the edge of their seats waiting for. But it is a one step that needs to be traveled in the right direction of 1,000 steps in order to uh, build a World Series team. So I think the move is positive. Like I said, the cost to the Orioles is so minimal that there really is, I think, in effect, no downside. The only downside is Rubenstein loses a couple, equivalents of quarters and nickels for himself. That's the downside for him and the Orioles. But overall, this is sort of where it's at. And yeah, I mean, I think the Orioles um, have made a good move in the direction of something that's useful, but also um, in a sense frustratingly minimal in the same way because just the Orioles have been reluctant to really, really uh, go all in, I think, or make a really big move and really move some of the prospects that Elias is caring about and, uh, holding on to the extent that he is. So, yeah, I think, it wouldn't be frustrating if this was not the replacement for making a big move, uh, and that if this was a move that was made to supplement a big move, that would be more exciting. And I would view this in a much more favorable way, but this is the Orioles trying to basically patch up and put a band-aid on and be cheap about trying to spend money in a way that has the potential, I think, to really accelerate their chances of winning the World Series, even if not just this year, but within the next few years. The Orioles did make the move last year to get Corbin Burns, and this year the Orioles have not made a similar move. that has sort of demonstrated that they are really committed to making a serious attempt at winning the World Series. Maybe that move will come at the trade deadline. Very, very possible that it also won't as well. And the Orioles are just going to try to play the normal sort of game that they play, where they are satisfied, sort of holding on to all their prospects and are satisfied just taking their chances in the playoffs and just hoping that something goes well, and trying to extend their window for success as long as possible, while, of course, spending as little money as possible. So, um, like I said, I think this is an overall move. The larger context, this is an overall good move. I think, maybe I didn't need to go into the larger context of the Orioles being complacent. I think overall, or having a complacent sort of mentality and approach to this season. So maybe I didn't need to introduce the negative context, and that could have been relegated to another episode or to a different discussion. But I do think when I'm thinking about this move, that's sort of what comes to mind, is that this is a replacement to really trying to do something serious, to trying to win, and to win a World Series and put the Orioles over the top. Trying to make the Orioles win the division, to beat the Yankees, to, which still could happen, especially with the offseason the Yankees have had, which has not been bad. They did get Max Fried, but they did lose Soto. So I think it's possible, of course, the Orioles can win the division, but Michael Elias is not acting like he really cares that much about winning the division this year. So, at least through the moves he's making, he might try to do it in other ways, like trying to recommend Brandon Hyde shift the lineup in this way and that way and that sort of thing. But in terms of making moves and spending money and all that kind of thing, not showing any commitment to winning the division or trying to win a World Series this year in particular. So that's the frustrating context of this move. Anyway, I won't belabor this anymore. Thank you all so much for listening. Please follow the show, give us a 5-star rating and review. We do have a YouTube channel. Go over there, subscribe to us on YouTube. We are getting ready for spring training and eventually opening day, so we're excited about that. On YouTube, if you listen to this, have any thoughts, comments, please do share. Yeah, comment below with any thoughts, analysis, agree, disagree with the analysis I'm presenting here. Please let me know. Um, if you want to get in touch with the show, please email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Feel free to follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at the Warehouse Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. Welcome to Baltimore, Ramon Laureano. I'm Jesse, and go O's.